Hi, everybody. So I know we've all been in a situation where we want to either update to the latest version of an app that we have on our phone or get a really cool new app that we want to follow our favorite president or social media influencer or whoever it might be. But what if in the background that app is doing some janky stuff with your privacy or even your security? Welcome back to the Legitimate Cybersecurity Podcast. I'm Dustin Brewer, and with me is my co host, Frank. And we're here today to
Still in
talk
this
about,
mortal form.
for now, oh my gosh, that's not, like if something ever happened to you after we just said that, they're going to come to me and say, like, what did
Dustin
he,
Brewer is suspect number one in my disappearance. And I only
yeah,
say that because he might actually help find whoever did it. And this will help get
yes.
the police there.
Or good segue into what we're talking about today. Frank's phone and his apps might help us find him as well. So today we're talking about the security of applications. Specifically, we're going to use the latest release of the White House app that came out this week and some of the things that security researchers are finding when they're decompiling this and also just doing some basic security research on it. So the first and foremost on this topic, Frank, is the capability. And look, I think in the age we live in, we're kind of used to this app is listening to you, or this app knows where your location is, or it's sending your location to Facebook, or it's sending your location to Instagram, or whatever it is that you're using. But I don't know if you necessarily expect that when you download something from the US government, or maybe you do, right? Now, look, anything that the US government does, there's going to be at least 50% of the population, at least in the United States, right? So anything that the government does in the United States, there's going to be at least 50% of the population who's probably not going to like it for one reason or another. They're probably just going to not like it at all. However, what's going on here with this app is a little concerning. And so let's start off talking about GPS tracking capabilities within your phone and within apps themselves, right? So one of the findings here is that there is GPS tracking happening on the White House app. It's not turned on yet. It's dormant in the code right now, but it is there. The capability is there for it to send your GPS location back to a server for some purposes. Who knows what that's for, right? Where do you lie with this, Frank? Are you like, oh, we're done with this? Like we already know that these apps are going to track us, or are you concerned here with, I guess, first of all, the source of where this is coming from, and also the vast amounts of data that can be collected on you? But let's start with GPS.
Well, first and foremost, I'm not surprised it's dormant because there's a lot of things that are dormant in the White House right now. So
Heyo.
I'm not too surprised. But I think that having the capability to, and I'm going to take another step back here. You said an app to track my favorite president. Ain't no app out there tracking James Polk because they don't need to, by the way. They all know where he is in the grave, still
That
there.
sounds like you know what though? That does sound like an interesting. I think that's your $1 million app idea, the Polk tracker.
Polk tracker. And all you do is open it up and it goes, he's still there, still there, still dead. Bones.
But look, like, and that's one of the things though is that it's not just people who are fans of the current United States president. It's also it claims to that you will get very special access to presidential announcements or decrees or whatever it might be. So even if you're a reporter or somebody in politics and you want to know what's going on, in the Oval Office, this app is claiming that it is the app to have on your phone, even more so than Truth Social, which is interesting. But we'll step back from that. Going back on a GPS.
Yeah. Well, let's take a few things apart and look at things from a maybe a bit of a more historical and contextual lens, right? There's no need to include the module that does have GPS tracking on purpose. The fact that it's there but not turned on doesn't give me any encouragement. It can be turned on at any time, right? And that's not just a White House app, that's any app. We've talked more than once on this show how your apps are tracking you. We talked about it, what, 2 shows ago, right? Where they're tracking you in coordination with the apps that are tracking you and what you're watching on the TV in order to identify both what you like to watch, when you like to watch it, what you're doing on your phone while you watch and stuff. So I personally have an inherent distrust for any app that has these types of tracking things natively on them. Now, you have the ability through certain phone systems, such as iOS, to ensure that they cannot track you and you can turn that off. You also don't have to download the app. I have found, but I am still concerned. And I like that you brought up GPS first because there have been several. I do not know who is developing the White House app. I do know that several of the things that have been developed during this administration have been developed by organizations that have specifically in the past supported the special interests of this administration. One of those apps which have done that is Parler. And
Mhm.
we know how great the security on Parler was when it very easily was accessible, and not just the GPS data, but other data to identify January 6th participants. I think we call them participants now. Is that what we have to call them?
Something.
I
Patriots,
call
I
them
think.
something. Anyway, there's a Peacock show. I think that's got the title for them, but I don't know. Anyway, my point there being that it's in there. I am not confident whether I agree with the politics or not with the current administration. I am not confident in the development of the application, especially when you consider many government contracts, assuming this was a bid contract and not a no bid one, is lowest priced, technically acceptable, right? So that means that the application that's put in is technically acceptable and meets all the requirements, but it is also at the lowest price. Now, there's two ways to look at this because I've seen both. First, it means you're going to get what you pay for, not something great. The second is the company then gets in business with the government and then has mechanisms through which they can increase their price over time, thus bringing up the actual amount of money they come in. Because at the end of the day, the US government is still funded by nepotism like most other governments. So I am not surprised that GPS is in there because I'm sure there's a bunch of conspiracy theorists or sound minded individuals who can reasonably state that this can be turned on to track people. I don't know if it's going to track the people they want, an incentivized administration may want to track. If there's a big push to, for example, ICE is doing a big push to try and remove illegal migrants. I don't think they're downloading the White House app. I'm just going to go out on a limb here. So I don't think it'll help them
Probably
track them
not.
down.
Yeah, probably not.
So that's my thought with that. I'd also be more interested in the actual underpinnings of the rest of the build because I'm not entirely convinced this is something that is probably built with security in mind up front.
Yeah, and we'll definitely go into that. I did want to start with GPS because it is a part of privacy, and this isn't just the White House app that does this, right? I don't know if you remember this, but when I kind of first jumped into Android programming when we first met, actually, and started
Yeah.
working together, I started kind of doing some decompilation myself and some analysis on what was going on. And I used to be a big person who, this is back in my 20s, but I used to be a big chiver. I loved going on the chive. That was kind of like my
We're having a chive.
I don't know. I think it's still Chive TV's still around because if you go to like a bar, sometimes they'll have Chive TV still up.
And
So
that's the only place I see it though. I wonder if
yeah,
bars are the only place like I don't even know where to watch it. Probably online, I'm sure, but like they're on the TV and stuff. Like
yeah.
is it a YouTube channel at this point?
I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. But
For the
I
five
stopped.
bars that have chive. Tell us
Yeah,
how.
I stopped. Yeah, that's right. Any bar owners out there, let us know how you get the Chive TV. And so I was doing this analysis on the data that was being sent back and forth on Chive, and it was sending my exact GPS location, so like 2 meters accuracy, back to a server in China. Now, I followed it for a little bit, and I was like, it's probably advertisements, probably, but either way, where we worked at the time, that was not an okay thing. So I completely deleted it off my phone. I completely stopped using the Chive app. I'm not saying the Chive app does this today. I'm not trying to put any emphasis on the Chive or what it is what their coding practices are like today. Back then, it was a little bit more of the wild west on the internet and advertisers. So it was what it was. Go ahead.
Speaking of our old line of work and not allowed to be tracked, did you see the French boat? I think it was a boat, the French boat out in off the coast of Africa or whatever, and people were able to track it because a dude was doing his morning run on the boat and had his fitness tracker on,
Whoa,
and it had
no.
all the GPS cords. And it was like publishing it, and they're like, "Oh, we know where this boat is now." Tut tut.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
loose, loose tweets sink ships.
Sink ships, loose Fitbit. Your ship hit. Yeah, there you go. Bad Fitbit, your ship hit. There you go.
Wow. Okay.
Copyright.
Yeah. TM Frank Downs. And so it's not just the White House app that's doing this, right? It is a little weird because usually when we talk about apps that are recording your data and sending it somewhere to an advertiser or to somebody else, we say, well, if you're not paying for it, you are
Do the
for the
product.
product, right? That's a very common saying. What's weird about this is that we are paying for this. This is United States, at least you and I, who are United States citizens, are paying for this. We're paying for it with our tax money. Our
Unlike
tax
the
money
East
built
Wing.
this. And
Yeah.
so there really shouldn't be any need for advertisement or selling of any information or anything like that to fund it. We're already funding it with our taxes. That's kind of where, and again, there's a lot of apps out there that do this. There's a lot of apps out there that send your location to unknown, sources, hopefully ads, but maybe not. We never know, right? We all hit agree on the terms and conditions, right? Because we don't have time to read 125 pages. This is a little bit different. I feel like because it is coming from the US government. So it is one of those things where there is an expectation of obviously privacy, even though the US government doesn't really have any privacy regulations federally anyways. And an expectation of this is our app because we did pay for it as United States taxpayers. So it's just a kind of an interesting thing there. So one of the other things, and bring it back to your point earlier, Frank, where you said like what else is going on here security wise, right?
You're going to
There
tell me
were
they store it on an own cloud at the White House. It's going to be a Raspberry Pi with own cloud on it, isn't it?
They found out that the server is running on a Raspberry Pi and that the IP address is coming from the Treasury Department. Now,
Exactly.
so there are some very strange things happening with the coding itself. Specifically, there's a GitHub dependency in there that just goes to kind of a random guy's GitHub account
Why not?
that pulls
Sure.
that pulls a library probably, right? And look, once again, this is something that apps do all the time. They pull third-party libraries in order to so that the original programmer doesn't have to rewrite something that's already been written before, right? It makes it easy, it makes development quick, it's fine. However,
When was
this is
the library last updated?
this is where the security questions come in. Not only the security questions, but the supply chain questions. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Frank, to kind of dive into that a little bit
So my questions would be, one, who is this guy with random GitHub, right? Second, how often has he updated? Is it still being maintained? Has he updated this GitHub? Because I cannot tell you. I learned this lesson once the hard way when I was trying to use, what was it, OpenDLP for an implementation of DLP once, because you and I were working on a project and they gave us $0
more.
to an example of DLP. And I
That's right.
found a DLP implementation. It was like built off Security Onion or something like that. And I got it to work once after 8 hours. And it was the worst experience. And I learned that day that it was probably some dude's random grad school project that had not been updated in forever. So my first question would be, is it updated? Is it updated regularly? Is the individual who is in charge of this GitHub account a known individual? Are they someone you can find out about somewhere else? Also, what type of dependencies does the code have in that GitHub actual code? You know what, Dustin? The more we're talking about this, there is a non-zero chance that the White House application for phones was vibe coded by some dude over the weekend that
Sure.
doesn't know how to code.
Yes, I think that's a fair assumption to make for sure. Whether or
We're
not
not
it
saying it's the truth.
was
We're just not faulting anyone who might assume as such based upon the findings.
right. And so, this brings it back to digital supply chain as well, where we've seen nation state actors before go through extreme measures to try to get embedded into a large
Yeah.
let's use Red Hat Linux, right? So this is where this happened. This is the most recent example, or the biggest example I can think of, where there was a nation state who had programmed gotten on a GitHub to do an open source project, specifically I think for OpenSSL. And so what they had done is they had embedded basically a backdoor into OpenSSL, which was compiled along, and they got Red Hat to include it into their unstable release, their dev release for enterprise for Red Hat Enterprise. And there was one or no, he wasn't even a security researcher; he was a programmer, and he noticed that the times of his connections had slowed down exponentially. And he's like, "What's going on?" And he traced it back to this library. Luckily, Red Hat caught it. This person caught it, submitted it to Red Hat. Red Hat caught it, and then, of course, the programmer disappeared, never to be heard from again. So those are the kinds of lengths that people go through in order to get something into a digital supply chain. This type of implementation means you just have to compromise one account, and then you're in the White House's digital supply chain for an application. What you can do with that and where you can go with that as a hacker or a nefarious actor, that's debatable and definitely something that's worth looking into, but it still is a risk, right? And this is what we mean when we talk about digital supply chain, when we talk about, ironically, the previous president of the United States sent out an executive order requiring that any the software developed for the US government had to go through what's known as an SBOM review. So, a software bill of materials. In other words, listing all the dependencies that you're using to make code. So, all of those have to be verified and ensure that there's nobody in there trying to make their way into the digital supply chain in order to compromise a piece of software that the US government is going to use.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine if that was successful? By the way, that dude or gal, that individual
Yes,
would
group
have
of people probably, but
pulled
yes.
off one of the best, most impressive hacks ever. Not that anyone would ever know, right? But I would put that right up there with that. And again, this is supply chain, an example of a supply chain incident. Do you recall, what is it, 2019, 2020, where they discovered like 90% of the actual server hardware that's being used by the internet had like a physical exploit installed on it, like the size of a grain of sand?
Yes.
That was completely like, and it was so bad that all these companies didn't even want to talk about it. Like they supposedly complied in the way they were supposed to,
Hmm.
but it was found on everything, on all these server racks everywhere. And for those who are listening and watching who don't understand why this is such a bad problem, the first example, what Dustin and I were discussing, was an example of exploiting the supply chain through specifically software, right? Through a very important piece of software, right? With SSL and encryption protocol. We could do a class on this, but I'm not. Listen, I teach class at night. I don't need it right now. This other example, though, was a hardware one. It was a piece of hardware. So even if you cleaned off the whole system and reflashed everything, it would still work because you'd have to physically go to the board, find the little sucker and pull it off. And then who knows, when you pull it off, it would break anything. So yes, Dustin, I too also believe that the supply chain is, it's very important and, we gotta keep an eye out, but like that, man.
And I think, we when we talk about supply chain, I think we think about things like that more often than not. More things of like hardware, like, oh,
Oh,
who
yeah.
we bought this from, there's a backdoor installed on it or whatever. We don't software supply chain has I hope it's on most cybersecurity practitioners, like foreground of their brain nowadays, but it's not always, right? It's we often think about supply chain as, I buy something, it gets shipped to me, the chain it went through to get to me is the supply chain. Very similar process, just more instantaneous, I guess you can say, on for grabbing libraries offline or whatever it is.
But
So
Dustin, this brings 2 more thoughts to my mind because I wanna know your thoughts on it. At what point is it malicious action compared to incompetence and or lethargy? Because I'm thinking of 2 examples. One, there are prominent cybersecurity professionals who we very well esteem, specifically, who are out there saying that you can't trust your router. And then they go through the whole rigmarole of showing you why you can't trust your router because of, there's flaws in it and this could be exploited and this might be a problem. And if somebody contorted this way or did it like this, then it would be, it's poorly built. So it's ripe for exploitation. That doesn't mean that the router creators, right? The people who are making all these routers are doing that with the intent of having these systems exploited. Making that mental jump of this is a poor one person's opinion of a poorly built device does not mean China is actively hacking all these devices and controlling a gigantic botnet. In the
yes,
same way, people are going to get upset. In the same way that everyone said the election devices, right, had potential security flaws, wherein there was absolutely no evidence those potential flaws were exploited, they then said the election was rigged and hacked. There was no, I can agree with you that, yeah, election integrity and security is very important. And oh, look at this. You might have actually found something that we should look at and secure. But I also see you are not providing any proof that that actually occurred. So where is that line? Because I don't believe that poorly built, shoddily put together, subjectively shoddily put together devices or systems or software necessarily means that they are, supply chain exploitations with intent.
no, absolutely, and this is something that we deal with on a daily basis in cybersecurity, especially during incident response. Is what was the intent, right? So you can have an unwitting internal person, you can have a witting internal person who does some kind of internal attack, right? That can be because somebody found a USB drive in the parking lot and plugged it into their computer. And guess what? Now they just plugged in
Well,
this malicious
also
code.
don't do that.
Yeah, I also don't do that. But again, as humans, we're curious. We're like, oh, whose is this? Let's plug it in. Maybe it has pictures on it. And we can find out whose it is, and we can return it to our coworker or whatever, right? Or we like each other. We're humans. We like each other. We want to see property returned because we would like to have those things returned to us, right? So it all comes from that. That's the intent, right? Is like, oh, I was just trying to find out whose this was to see where I could return it to because maybe it was somebody who I work with, and that's always kind of a big thing, right? And when it comes to internal investigation, and then what happens to that employee, whether it's a slap on the wrist or they get fired or they get charged, it all comes down to intent. And look, we've been in the business long enough as well where we've seen software that's been developed on a whim. Now it's called vibe coding. Back then it was just called like, staying up all night and programming a really crappy piece of code
It was called
to
doing
do
a
it.
bad job,
Yeah.
Dustin, and I did it often.
And so we've seen software that has been developed for well over a decade, if not 2 decades, that has been uh, not secure. We've seen software that has been through an SDLC, a secure development lifecycle, meaning that it has been code reviewed and it still has flaws at the end of the day because somebody found something that security researchers didn't think about initially, something the programmers didn't think about initially has been exploited. That happens on a daily basis. Vulnerability management is literally that, right? It's literally finding like somebody found this piece of code that they released for whatever device or whatever thing on your network that can cause remote code execution or can cause some kind of compromise. Right? So every day, this is what we deal with, right? And so, yeah, you're right. We can't necessarily just say, "Oh, well, they use this, and therefore, they're going for a supply chain attack." However, what we can say is that we have seen when a particular piece of software or device is known to be used by a government, let's say a messaging app that people might send war plans through. Once it's
Wouldn't know what you're
revealed
talking about. Completely unaware.
Once it was revealed that Signal was being used by the Department of Defense and by the White House and by, higher echelons of the US government, guess where Russian and Chinese and North Korean attackers started focusing? They started focusing on Signal app. So,
Well, they
go
didn't.
ahead.
They didn't just start then. I'm gonna do a little
Sure.
bit of
Yeah, yeah,
spoiler
yeah.
alert.
No, no,
Yeah.
no. Fair enough. Fair enough. It didn't just start then. It's probably been under attack for quite some time, but it became a much higher attack at that point.
You know, the one that's most, gnarly for me that I just think people are really sleeping on if they really want to get recruited by terrible people is Telegram. Telegram, the evolution of Telegram over the last 5 to 10 years, it has literally
Yeah.
gone from a secure messaging app to a completely like Hydra-headed social media app that has some of the most, I'm going to be perfectly blunt, amazing amazing misinformation and disinformation out there. Buddy, I have seen on Telegram misinformation and disinformation that literally convinces people the sun is not real. The sun in the sky. Okay? Now, so say what you want about Signal and yeah, appropriate security considerations and so forth. But meanwhile, you got this other one where people are actively getting convinced the sun is not real and that it's made of crystals and stuff.
Psyop.
Anyway,
I
if
love it.
anyone's looking for a terrible time, you know where to go.
Almost as bad as 4chan. But
Yeah.
your
Don't
point of
go.
incompetence versus indifference versus witting versus unwitting, Frank, in the code, one of the other things that the security researchers found were things like hard-coded local host addresses, things
Yeah.
that
Why
probably should have
not?
been taken out, right? Development tools that probably should have been removed or before production, right?
Which version
All
of
the thi
WordPress was it on?
That's right. I totally forgot that there was a WordPress site on there. I
Because
totally
why not?
forgot.
That's another vibe code giveaway. Just heads up. If you're the
Right,
federal
and
government and using WordPress, don't.
that is a shocking thing, and nothing against WordPress sites or people who use
No, yeah, I
WordPress.
do like WordPress. It's
It's
great.
a
But then when I actually have a company with real monies, I try to not use it.
Yeah. Yeah, you try to use something maybe a little more proprietary or, less, I don't know. Anyway,
Targeted,
less
less
frameworky,
targeted.
less targeted. Yeah.
I don't hate on WordPress, and I have an appreciation for it, and I understand like 90% of mom and pops out there run on it, and I know why because I've made a WordPress site in the past. We used to do it all the time, right, for our
It's
specific
free.
act.
Yeah.
But
Very low
when
cost.
you get to a certain level of multinational company and or government, you should probably use something else. Just going to throw it out there because it is one of in the same way that Windows is always like the targeted end device target set for attackers. WordPress is the hosting configuration format capability that is like the low hanging fruit for a lot of targeters. WordPress doesn't necessarily, I appreciate WordPress's ability to let you patch it. That doesn't mean the people who are hosting their WordPress are even know how to patch.
Yeah.
Food
And
for thought.
so, yeah, and this, I mean, again, this goes, and once again, this isn't isolated only to this White House application that's come out, right? This is something that's done on all applications. This is one of the ways that when we're running, for example, a penetration test on an application, that we're looking for those types of things left over from development. Libraries left over, hard coded IP addresses. Those are the types of things that security researchers are looking for to find 0 days or to find ways to exploit or get data out of an application. And this happens all the time. Organizations go through this and they go through penetration tests to find these types of things to say, oh, yep, we left that in there. Sorry, we're going to delete it, recompile, send out the next version. That's what you're supposed to do. That's taking responsibility, accountability, and going forward and releasing something that's more secure to the public, right? And so, on that note of accountability, because this was kind of released in a very haphazard way, apparently, right? We're not 100% sure on
Allegedly, assumedly.
allegedly. Now there is a little bit of well, who's accountable for this? Where does this start and stop? Who signed off on it? Number one, who programmed it? Number two, and
We'd
so
love to have you on the show if you watch.
now we're walking through, we've kind of walked through the full cybersecurity stack here, where we've started with something, on a privacy level. We've gotten a little bit deeper and technical. Now we're kind of zooming back out to start looking at governance, risk, and compliance, right? So from that perspective, Frank, where are we at? Like, what are your thoughts on, I guess I shouldn't say who do you think we should, prosecute, but who ultimately has the authority here? Who ultimately has the accountability?
Do not know.
Okay.
Listen, there's a lot of stuff that gets developed by the government, and having worked for the government, you and I both in different capacities, it is real easy to take accountability when something goes right, but then also incredibly hard to figure out whose fault it is when something goes wrong. And while I appreciate the government, I pay the government as I'm required by law to do. I consistently find that even when you find the point of failure in something like this, when something goes wrong and something breaks, instead of it being appropriately handled, the individual who is responsible at worst has a lateral movement to somewhere else. More often is promoted away to somewhere else. So when we're talking about accountability and responsibility, I can give you a list of people who are not going to take accountability if this thing doesn't work. But I can't give you a level of confidence that any real change will happen. You see consistent government efforts to appropriately address something like this. And it's why I am going to get in a lot of trouble for this. Why I have no faith in CMMC, to be perfectly blunt. CMMC is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, I believe. I don't know. But we'll have someone on to tell me how wrong I am. I care so little about it after working with it for so many years that, like, literally it's kind of leaving the brain at this point. But the whole idea was, there had to be a standard cybersecurity level of protection for government companies that work with the government and confidential, unclassified, what is it? Confidential, unclassified information. I hear it called QI a lot, CUI, right? And the whole idea was noble at the start. We need to figure out a way to protect this information, and organizations have to be held to a standard in order to keep information safe. What has ended up happening is a bunch of people who want to gatekeep and find actual career security through saying they're in charge of something were able to malign and misdirect and abuse this legitimate noble effort for over 6 years while it was in development before it became official. And then when it did, it looked nothing like it did going in. The gatekeepers were in place. The certifiers of the Grand Council of Certifying Wizards were in their spots, who will stay there till they die. And all they care about is making money off of people. They'll say, "Oh no, I'm here because I want to make sure the government's safe." They do not care. They want the meal ticket. I may be pessimistic, right? I will call it in this case and in other cases, such as you and I have seen, pragmatic, right? At the end of the day, true cybersecurity is going to come from an actual legitimate desire to keep things safe, and no certification or following standards is going to be following set standards implicitly because they're supposed to is going to keep you safe. You need to follow those standards because you want to be safe, because you want to be secure. And there has to be, as we talked about it, a legitimate desire and intent to keep an application, a website, a company safe. So that's a long way of saying, I don't think when it comes to something like this, anyone's going to take accountability. I don't think the true desire is to keep things accountable. I don't think much of that is in the government at all. I hear there's a GAO. It really worked well for you and me when they stole our entire identities back in 2013, 2014. We saw a lot of people held accountable for that one, Dustin,
That's
right?
right.
They took our SF-86s, the most sensitive information available to us. Nothing happened. So everyone just be bitter.
On that
Leave
note,
your hate
though,
comments below.
yeah, here we it's gonna get comments. I'll give you that.
Our 2 comments, one of them might be negative.
On that note, though, this kind of goes back to a common theme that we have on the podcast, which is if this is something that you want to do, then do it. But if you don't want to do, if you're bored by cybersecurity or you're bored by the idea of GRC, then don't go into GRC. If you're bored by the idea of packet
Dear
analysis,
God, yeah.
don't go into incident response or SOC
Just
stuff. If
just
you're
because you failed the CPA exam doesn't mean you should be a GRC auditor.
Now
Think on
you're
it.
really targeting. But yes, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I actually had this conversation this week. Who did I have that with? But anyway, about the world of certification is and digital trust is moving away from SOC 2 Type 2. And I know I'm gonna get hit for this one. Uh,
That doesn't mean you
you're
shouldn't still get it, companies listening.
Yes, absolutely. If there's a requirement from a vendor that says that you have to have this, or a requirement from the government that says you have to have this, then you have to have it, right? However, it's kind of been treated as this report card for your overall cybersecurity. I don't think it was ever really meant to be that way, but that's what it's kind of been, right?
No, because the thing at the end is it still needs a signature from an accountant to actually matter. If what is required to have this accreditation is an actual signature from someone who doesn't understand cyber, I don't care.
Yeah. And but this comes back to what we've been talking about, which is it takes a certain mindset to be in cybersecurity, and we do get the question a lot, like, how do I succeed? How do I break into cybersecurity? What certification should I take? What and really, you and I have talked about this probably ad nauseum at this point, but it's really more of a mindset than it is anything else. The person who programmed this app probably didn't have that mindset. They might not have even had a programmer's mindset, right? Which is or an engineer's mindset.
They may have been, in fact, a product manager.
They may have been a product manager. They may have used Claude, in which case they're probably
Nope,
fired now.
not for government work.
No, I know that's what I'm saying. Yeah, they got fired for using Claude. But and so this kind of brings us full circle now because we've taken this one case study and kind of gone through an entire series of parts of cybersecurity. I'm not saying you have to be interested in all of it in order to be good at one part of it. But what I am saying is that these are the types of things that bad guys are thinking of. And if you're someone who's in charge of cybersecurity and you can't get into that mindset, or you're like, that part's boring, so I'm going to ignore it, guess what the bad guy's going to exploit? He's going to exploit that. He's going to exploit you. He's going to exploit your inability or your boredom or your complacency in order to he or she is going to exploit that in order to gain unauthorized access to whatever it is. So, anyways, with that, Frank, any closing thoughts on your side? Now that we've ostracized NIST, uh, AICPA,
I like NIST.
NOSO,
I got nothing against NIST. I like NIST. Here are my favorite GRC organizations in order of preference. NIST, ISO, I guess HIPAA's okay. Although I think High Trust is a little overpriced for what it is. High Trust is a little too much table stakes, but so much of it is based off NIST. I have a bit of a respect for it.
and ISO for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I always kind of wonder why DOE has their own cybersecurity framework. I mean, I know it's important, but no one seems to care about. I think they need better PR for it, personally. But I still respect it, and so there's that. That might end a list unless there's a. I mean, I kind of, I was looking at the California Consumer Privacy Act, and while it's imperfect, what they're doing with the requirements for for companies that they have to submit starting in 2027, I'm actually really impressed with, because they're not just saying do this thing. When you submit your submission for attestation, you have to also show your methodology of how, not just that you were assessed, or you had to have an independent assessor.
Hmm.
You had to show their methodology. They have to show the methodology, and then they have to show the observations, recommendations, findings, and then what you're doing from there. I actually have so I think as these things are getting more mature, they're getting better developed,
Hmm.
and they're becoming more applicable. That said, I still have certain feelings about, and I think the ones that I'm too close to, I've grown pretty disillusioned with. Let me say, I spent too much time watching some of these grow, so as a result, I'm pretty negative on them. But that doesn't mean they don't have a place. I mean, they're here, so hooray!
Yeah, I think to be honest with you, like I'm definitely with you on ISO. You know that I got to I had the honor of being a liaison to the ISO 27 K working group in
Out in
Paris
France,
in 2019, I think it was.
yeah, we
And I gotta be honest with you, I think that's where I met the most passionate people, to a fault, where they were yelling at each other over specific controls, and that's not how we do things in Sweden, you know? That's not how we do things over here in France, like, countries fighting about the proper way to implement a control, the proper way to judge a control, that was gonna go into the next.
those are the people I want doing my cyber.
Yes, those were it was just amazing to see that. It never got physical or anything, although I thought it was going to at one point when I was there, but never got physical, but there was heated debate. I'm sure we all, went out and had a beer afterwards and they were it was one of the more, you know, kind of enlightening and invigorating moments of my career where I was like, "Oh, there are people who are doing these things who care a lot." And that was great to see. So anyways, with that, Frank, any other closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to give a call out and a shout out to three of our fans who I know listen, and I really appreciate it. First, Gwen, your continued support means a lot to me and Dustin.
Love Gwen.
Jared, we appreciate that we actually have a family in Ohio with kids that listen to us at like breakfast and stuff. I literally have to find them and warn them sometimes about what's going to be discussed.
You're gonna
Every
curse.
time you bring up certain questionable examples, Dustin. And Chase, we get fan mail from Chase. It's great.
Yeah. Yes.
Really appreciate you listening there as well. So thank you. Oh, let me do it this week. Let me do the go away.
Take it away,
All right.
Frank.
Until next week, everyone, keep on cybering.